They don't yell, they don't attack, but silently they drain you. With fake smiles, constant complaints, subtle jabs. They chip away at your peace and pull you into their chaos. You don't notice the damage at first, until your mind is heavy, your purpose blurred, and your energy gone. This is how people destroy you. Not with force, but with presence. Not with insults, but with influence. And if you're not careful, their fear becomes your limit. Their habits become your downfall. Stoicism teaches us, your peace is your duty. As Marcus Aurelius said, your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought. But your thoughts are shaped by the people around you. That's why in this video, we reveal 11 types of people you must avoid at all costs. Not to punish them, but to protect yourself. If you've ever walked away from someone feeling drained, confused, or small, this is why. So tap like, subscribe, and let's begin.
Number 1.
The chronic complainer. There's a weight that enters the room when this person speaks. Not because they're aggressive, not because they shout, but because they infect the space with hopelessness. The chronic complainer is someone who has made negativity their identity. To them, every moment is an opportunity to highlight what's broken, unfair, or irritating. Their food is never warm enough. Their job is always a trap. Their friends don't do enough. And life, somehow, is always out to get them. What makes this dangerous isn't the occasional frustration we all feel. It's the habit. The Stoics warn that habits of thought become the shape of our soul. Epictetus said, "What upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about these things." But the chronic complainer has abandoned that wisdom. They don't reflect. They don't pause. They immediately label events as wrong, people as flawed, and life as a burden. And worst of all, they expect you to join in. At first, you might think listening is kindness. You might nod, offer sympathy, maybe even share your own troubles. But slowly, your emotional tone shifts. What you once shrugged off now irritates you. What you once felt grateful for now seems insufficient. You find yourself focusing on flaws, losing sight of what's working, and that's the real danger. Not that they bring darkness, but that they dim your light. Marcus Aurelius faced overwhelming pressures, betrayal, illness, political chaos, but he didn't let it rot his mindset. His writings, especially in meditations, are filled with reminders to himself to stay calm, to avoid complaining, to meet life with endurance. He didn't pretend pain didn't exist, but he refused to let it define him. That's the Stoic path, not blind optimism, but clarity, courage, and a refusal to indulge in what weakens the soul. The chronic complainer resists that clarity. They don't want perspective. They want company in their suffering. They don't want solutions. They want validation. They don't seek growth because growth would require accountability. And so they cling to the one power they feel they still have, the power to criticize. And make no mistake, their mindset is contagious. Over time, you'll start lowering your own standards. You'll interpret neutral events as attacks. You'll feel drained, even when nothing's wrong. That's the slow erosion Stoicism warns us about. As Seneca wrote, associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. But if someone's presence weakens your discipline, clouds your thinking, or corrupts your emotional tone, you must pull back. So how does a Stoic respond? Not with confrontation, not with judgment, but with distance, silence, internal boundaries. You don't need to argue. You don't need to fix them. You simply need to stop feeding their fire, speak less, nurture your own mindset. Don't reward the performance with attention. And most importantly, remember that choosing peace is not selfish, it's survival. The Stoic understands that your mindset is your fortress. and every complainer you entertain is a crack in the wall. Guard it well, because peace isn't something you find after chaos ends. It's something you protect while chaos speaks.
Number 2.
The excuse maker. They always have a reason, a delay, a disruption, a story that makes stagnation seem justified. The excuse maker doesn't always look irresponsible. In fact, they often sound intelligent, introspective, even wise. But pay close attention. Their life is built on avoidance. They dream big but act small. They speak of potential but resist process. And every missed opportunity is someone else's fault, something else's timing, never their own decision. What makes this mindset corrosive is not its noise, but its logic. It sounds reasonable, understandable, even fair. I was going to start, but work got busy. I wanted to change, but things aren't stable right now. The Stoics would see through this instantly. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The excuse maker, by contrast, lives entirely in the external. Their attention is outward, to obstacles, to blame, to luck, and never to the one thing they can control, themselves. Now here's the trap. When you surround yourself with this energy, it feels supportive. They'll validate your fears, affirm your delays, tell you it's okay to wait for the right time, but slowly your edge dulls, your urgency fades, and your vision becomes a story instead of a standard. You begin to mistake intention for discipline and comfort for peace. That's why Stoic clarity is essential here. As Seneca warned, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And wasting time doesn't always mean doing nothing. Sometimes it means surrounding yourself with people who make avoidance feel noble. Look at Ryan Holiday, one of the most disciplined modern voices of Stoicism. He entered the publishing world young, without prestige or power, but he didn't wait for perfect timing. He didn't explain his way out of the grind. He took ownership. He moved with quiet intensity. He failed, learned, adjusted, and kept moving. That's the Stoic path. Less talking, more doing, less reacting, more refining. Meanwhile, the excuse maker is still preparing, still thinking, still waiting. They're stuck not because they're weak, but because they've trained their mind to see action as optional. And if you absorb their mindset, you'll begin to treat your own discipline like a suggestion instead of a necessity. So what do? You don't debate. You don't try to change them. You guard your rhythm. You reinforce your standards. You protect your mental climate. Stoicism isn't about being perfect. It's about being accountable, about noticing when your energy is slipping and pulling it back. The moment you feel your goals becoming maybe someday instead of now, you must recenter. The truth is harsh but freeing. The more excuses you accept, the further you drift from mastery. That's why you must be precise with who you allow near your routine. If they don't respect discipline, they will slowly sabotage yours. So stay on the path, stay uncomfortable, stay in motion, and when someone starts offering reasons instead of results, listen with compassion but move with discipline. Because talk may soothe the ego, but only action builds the life.
Number 3.
The gossiper. They smile when others fall. They lean in when secrets are spilled. They thrive in the silence that follows someone else's humiliation. The gossiper is not simply someone who talks. They twist, they exaggerate, and they feed on scandal like it's nourishment. To them, information is power, but it's a hollow power, built on broken trust and weak character. They pretend to be interested in people, but what they really crave is leverage, and that hunger is dangerous. To the Stoics, speech was a sacred duty, Epictetus taught. Nature gave us one tongue and two ears so that we may listen more and talk less. But the gossiper doesn't listen to understand. They listen to retell. They don't seek truth. They seek attention. Their conversations rarely center around ideas or improvement. Instead, they orbit endlessly around who did what, who failed, and who should be judged. The gossiper creates a culture of suspicion, and if you're not careful, you'll slowly become part of it. The danger here isn't just moral. It's psychological. Gossip feels harmless. It creates quick intimacy. It gives you the illusion of closeness. You share a laugh. You bond over outrage. You feel included. But that intimacy is an illusion, because if someone speaks to you about others, they will surely speak about you to others. That's not trust, that's exposure. And when you live around this energy, you begin to shape your behavior not around virtue, but around fear. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Small minds discuss people." She wasn't quoting a Stoic, but she lived like one, surrounded by critics, whispered rumors, and political pressure. She stayed anchored. She refused to let gossip direct her energy. Like the Stoics, she understood. Your words are a mirror. They reflect not just what you think, but who you are. That's why Stoicism demands restraint. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often to stay silent unless his words serve the common good. The gossiper, on the other hand, speaks only to serve themselves. They use secrets like currency. They trade in resentment. They build influence through division. And the more time you spend in their company, the more you start measuring your worth by what you know about others, not by what you're building within yourself. But the Stoic path is the opposite. It's not about being liked. It's about being aligned. It's about cultivating ataraxia, inner stillness. And you cannot find that stillness in a mind polluted by petty judgments and shallow conversations. So what do you do when the gossiper approaches? You don't feed it. You don't perform outrage. You don't play along. You go quiet. You become still. You change the subject, or you excuse yourself entirely. Because silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Not every story is yours to carry. Not every truth needs to be repeated, and not every conversation deserves your participation. The gossiper may have many followers, but the Stoic walks alone in clarity, and that clarity is worth more than any scandal.
Number 4.
The envious. They smile when you fail. They go quiet when you win. They're the first to applaud you in public, but the last to support you in private. The envious person doesn't always look like an enemy. Often they're disguised as a friend, a colleague, even a mentor. But deep down, your growth unsettles them, not because you've done anything wrong, but because your progress reminds them of their own passivity. Your discipline exposes their comfort. Your rise makes them feel left behind. From the Stoic perspective, envy is more than an emotion. It's a form of internal decay. It's a judgment based on the false belief that someone else's success takes something away from you. But Epictetus taught, another person will not hurt you without your cooperation. You are hurt the moment you believe yourself to be. And the envious? They're already hurting. They believe life is a zero-sum game. And when someone close to them grows, they see it as a loss, not a lesson. The danger of being close to this kind of energy is rarely explosive. It's subtle. When you speak of your goals, they downplay them. When you share a win, they shift the topic. And when you shine, they look away. Over time, you start adjusting to their discomfort. You quiet your voice. You soften your ambition. You hide your joy. Not because they asked you to, but because their energy told you it wasn't welcome. That's how envy spreads. Not by force, but by silent suggestion. Marcus Aurelius confronted this dynamic with brutal clarity. He wrote, "Ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. Sanity means tying it to your own actions." The Stoic does not seek approval, they seek alignment. You are not here to manage other people's insecurities. You are here to live truthfully, purposefully, and without apology. If your success unsettles someone, that is their storm to weather, not yours to absorb. One of the clearest modern examples is Oprah Winfrey. As her influence grew, so did the criticism. People questioned her intentions, mocked her generosity, and doubted her worth. But she didn't shrink to make others comfortable. She continued to build. She refined her voice. She stayed rooted in purpose, not performance. That's Stoicism in motion. Enduring envy without becoming bitter, and never abandoning your values to gain someone else's approval. So how does a Stoic protect themselves from envy? Not by arguing, not by confronting, but by detaching quietly. You observe, you recognize the signs. You stop oversharing with those who can't celebrate. And most importantly, you never tone yourself down to make someone else feel taller. Because your progress isn't a threat, it's a mirror. And those who feel discomfort in your reflection are revealing their own limitations, not yours. Let them flinch. Let them distance themselves. Let them say what they need to say. But you keep rising quietly, relentlessly, and without guilt. Because staying small just to be accepted is the most dangerous kind of self-betrayal.
Number 5.
The hot-tempered one. They walk into a room like a storm, loud without saying a word, tense without being touched. You never know what version of them you're going to face, calm or cruel, charming or volatile. The hot-tempered person doesn't simply experience anger, they live in it. They treat every inconvenience as an attack, every disagreement as a betrayal. Their emotions don't stay inside. They spill outward and control the entire environment. To the Stoics, this kind of temperament was not a sign of strength, but of slavery. Seneca devoted an entire essay to this very danger, On Anger, where he warned, "No plague has cost the human race more." Anger, he taught, is not a reaction. It is a failure of training. It is the moment when we abandon our reason and surrender to impulse. And the hot-tempered person does this so often that it becomes their identity. But rather than see it as a flaw, they wear it as a badge. They call it passion, they call it honesty, but what it really is chaos. Here's the real danger. When you stay too close to someone ruled by rage, you begin to shift. At first, you try to soothe them. You tread lightly, you watch your words, but soon your nervous system learns a pattern. That peace is conditional, that moods are contagious, that your own clarity must be sacrificed to avoid conflict. You begin to mistake fear for respect, and in that trade, you lose yourself. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by betrayal and pressure, trained himself daily to never give in to reactive emotion. In Meditations, he wrote, "When angry, count the consequences." That simple instruction carries immense power, because when you react in anger, you lose twice. First your peace, then your clarity, and a person who cannot stay calm cannot see straight. Their world is always burning, and they want you to live in the fire with them. That's why Stoic mastery requires not only managing your own emotions, but filtering the emotions of those around you. One modern example of this mastery is Fred Rogers. Better known as Mr. Rogers, he faced criticism, political resistance, and public misunderstanding. But he responded not with outrage, not with defensiveness, but with quiet, firm clarity. His calmness wasn't softness, it was strength, a strength built on principle, not ego. So what do you do when faced with the hot-tempered? First, don't absorb their heat. Their fire is not your fuel. Their chaos is not your responsibility. Second, don't try to fix them. It is not your job to regulate another adult's emotions. It is your job to stay rooted in your values, to maintain your emotional sovereignty, and to stop rewarding volatility with attention. The Stoic doesn't fear rage. They neutralize it, not with louder words, but with deeper presence, not with reaction, but with distance. They know that some storms must be walked away from, not because you're weak, but because you've outgrown the need to stand in the rain. Walk away, not in hatred, but in discipline, not to punish, but to protect, because your peace is sacred and it was never meant to be collateral damage in someone else's emotional war. Number 6, the drama magnet. There's always a crisis, always a meltdown, always some urgent problem that demands your emotional energy. The drama magnet doesn't seek peace. They seek chaos, not because they enjoy suffering, but because it gives them attention. To them, stillness feels like rejection. Quiet feels like emptiness. So they stir conflict, manufacture urgency, and feed on emotional intensity to avoid the silence of their own unresolved pain. The Stoics warned us of this exact pattern. They taught that the highest good is ataraxia, a state of inner calm untouched by external storms. Epictetus wrote, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. But the drama magnet has no boundary between what is theirs to hold and what must be released. They make every inconvenience into a crisis, every neutral event into an offense. And the real danger? They need an audience. They need someone to react, to validate, to absorb, and that someone is often you. At first it feels noble, like you're being a good friend, a good partner, a good person, but slowly the cost rises. Your focus is scattered, your peace is fractured, your clarity is drowned beneath their emotional waves. You begin to anticipate their next spiral. You walk on eggshells, and worst of all, you start confusing emotional turbulence with connection. That is the trap. The drama magnet doesn't want solutions. They want your participation, not in growth, but in dysfunction. Viktor Frankl, the renowned psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote about the power of meaning and responsibility in the face of suffering. He said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response." The drama magnet has no such space. They react without reflection, they collapse into emotion without restraint, and they invite others to collapse with them. But the Stoic refuses, because to collapse with them is to lose yourself. That's why clarity is not cruel. Distance is not disloyal, it's discipline. The Stoic path demands that we preserve our emotional bandwidth for what we can control. That means drawing lines even when it feels uncomfortable, even when they guilt you, because guilt is the drama magnet's favorite tool. The moment you step back, they accuse, "You're too cold, too harsh, too selfish." But the truth is, you're simply no longer available for emotional chaos masquerading as vulnerability. So how do you respond? You don't argue, you don't explain, you act with quiet strength. You stop fixing what's not yours. You stop sacrificing your serenity to be someone's emotional sponge. And you remember peace isn't passive, it's fiercely protected. The Stoic doesn't abandon others out of pride. They step back out of purpose. They know that not every fire is theirs to put out, and some people will keep lighting them just to see if you'll come running. Let them, but walk the other way, not with bitterness, but with wisdom, because your peace was never meant to be someone else's theater. Number 7, the Naysayer. They call it logic, they call it caution, but underneath all the carefully crafted words is something far more corrosive. Fear, dressed up as wisdom. The naysayer is the person who always has a reason why it won't work, why it's too risky, why you should wait. On the surface, they seem rational, even helpful, but look closer and you'll see they're not pointing out danger to protect you. They're projecting their own hesitation to stop you. The Stoics were painfully clear about this dynamic, Seneca wrote. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, and that is where the naysayer lives. In imagination, they envision every scenario where things go wrong. They rehearse failure so often, they begin to speak it with conviction. And when you share your vision with them, their first instinct is to shrink it, not because they hate you, but because your boldness threatens their comfort. Here's what makes it especially dangerous. Their doubt sounds like care. They say things like, I just don't want you to be disappointed, or I've seen people try that and fail. And slowly, their hesitation becomes your hesitation. Their fears nest inside your mind and start to grow. You find yourself second-guessing things you were once certain about. You begin editing your dreams to match their limitations. But the Stoic doesn't bow to fear dressed as logic. Stoicism is not about recklessness. It's about responsibility, Epictetus taught. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. In other words, decide your direction, then move. Let your values, not their doubts, lead the way. Steve Jobs is a modern example of this principle in action. Throughout his life, people told him he was too idealistic, that his vision was impractical, that his goals were too far ahead of their time. But he didn't anchor to their caution. He anchored to clarity. And through persistence, not argument, he proved the doubters wrong, not with debate, with results. This is the Stoic path. You don't need to silence the naysayer with words. You silence them with execution. Let your life become the proof. Let your discipline become your defense. Because in truth, the greatest threat to your dreams isn't failure. It's hesitation planted by those too scared to try. So the next time a naysayer whispers in your ear, pause and examine. Are they truly wise or just afraid? And if they're afraid, why should their fear become your limit? Protect your inner vision. Don't outsource your courage, because greatness is rarely born from consensus. It's forged in solitude, in resolve, in quiet, consistent motion. And that is something the naysayer will never understand. Number 8, the toxic positivist. They're always smiling, always upbeat, always deflecting. On the surface, it seems harmless, even pleasant, but spend enough time with the toxic positivist and you'll feel it. The quiet pressure to be okay all the time. The unspoken rule that says you're only allowed to feel what's convenient, that sorrow, doubt, grief are somehow weaknesses to be swept under the rug. The toxic positivist fears discomfort, not because they're bad people, but because they've never learned to sit with pain without being consumed by it. They avoid sadness not because they're strong, but because they don't know how to face it, so they bury it beneath shallow phrases like stay positive or good vibes only. And in doing so, they invalidate the real human experiences that shape growth, clarity, and emotional depth. The Stoics never preached forced optimism. They taught something far more powerful, emotional realism. Marcus Aurelius didn't write about rainbows and affirmations. He wrote about loss, betrayal, death, fatigue, and the duty to act anyway. He wrote, "You have power over your mind. Not outside events, realize this, and you will find strength." That's not denial, that's ownership. It means facing the storm with open eyes, not pretending it isn't there. The toxic positivist, however, lives in denial dressed as hope. They suppress anything that doesn't fit their idea of light. But real Stoic strength comes not from avoiding the darkness, but from walking through it without losing your direction. The moment we start filtering reality to make ourselves feel better, we've already lost clarity. Here's the subtle damage they cause. When you express pain, they change the subject. When you voice struggle, they offer slogans. When you seek depth, they offer distraction. Over time, you begin to censor yourself. You begin to smile through sadness. You begin to believe that your wounds make you unworthy of love or space, and that's when your emotional health begins to rot. Not because you're broken, but because you're surrounded by people who don't know how to hold anything heavy. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And the toxic positivist is a living example. Their cheerfulness is not peace, it's protection. Their enthusiasm is not truth, it's evasion. And if you're not careful, you'll start using their avoidance as your template. So what does the Stoic do? You meet them with kindness, but not imitation. You don't argue with their worldview, but you don't dilute your own. You speak with truth, you sit with what's uncomfortable, and you model emotional maturity by embracing the full range of human experience, not just the convenient parts. Because real peace isn't found in pretending everything's fine, it's found in knowing that even when things are not fine, you're still whole, still present, still capable of moving forward. The Stoic lives in truth, and sometimes that truth is heavy, but in bearing it with grace, you become light. Number 9, the victim. They speak of their pain often, but never of their progress. Every story they tell ends in injustice. Every path leads back to betrayal. The victim isn't defined by what happened to them. They are defined by their refusal to move beyond it. Pain becomes their identity. And because of that, healing feels like betrayal. Letting go would mean letting go of who they believe they are. The Stoics never denied suffering. In fact, they acknowledged its presence constantly. But they made one thing clear. Pain is not a life sentence. It is a teacher, Epictetus said. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The victim, however, rejects this truth. They don't want transformation. They want recognition. They don't seek strength. They seek sympathy. Their story isn't a bridge to healing. It's a home they've built from sorrow and chosen never to leave. At first, being near them feels noble. You want to listen, you want to support. But over time, the emotional weight grows heavier. Your empathy turns to guilt. Your joy begins to feel inappropriate. Your boundaries are called cold. Their worldview becomes a prison, and the longer you stay, the more you start shaping your actions to avoid setting them off. You talk less about your blessings. You hesitate to share your ambitions. You begin shrinking, not to protect them, but to survive them. But the Stoic does not abandon peace to accommodate pain that refuses to heal. Marcus Aurelius, having lost children and friends, wrote not with self-pity, but with clarity. Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. He saw that clinging to grief as identity was a form of delusion. True strength, he believed, was rooted in our ability to let go, to allow life to move, even when it moves through pain. A modern reflection of this resilience can be found in J.K. Rowling. She endured poverty, depression, and countless rejections. She could have chosen the victim story, but she didn't. She wrote, she built, she persisted, and in doing so, she turned suffering into something sacred, not by denying it, but by refusing to be defined by it. That is the Stoic response. To feel fully but never build a home in pain. So how should you respond to the victim? With compassion but not compliance. With understanding but not enablement. You listen without absorbing. You love without losing yourself. And most importantly, you never allow their helplessness to dictate your momentum. Because at some point, kindness without clarity becomes self-destruction, and love without limits becomes codependency. The Stoic offers a hand, not a crutch. They walk beside others when possible, but when someone chooses to sit in their suffering, to build their identity around their wounds, the Stoic walks on, not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. You were not built to live inside someone else's sadness. You were meant to rise and to invite others to do the same. Number 10, the manipulator. They don't shout, they don't force, they don't even look like a threat. But slowly, quietly, they twist the wires of your reality until you can no longer trust what you feel. The manipulator isn't always obvious. In fact, that's their strength. They use charm instead of confrontation, guilt instead of reason, and confusion instead of truth. And before you realize what's happening, your emotional clarity is no longer yours. It belongs to them. The Stoics taught that clarity is everything. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." But what happens when those thoughts are no longer your own? When someone else colors your perception with their narrative, their doubt, their subtle emotional games? The answer is simple. You begin to drift. You doubt your memory. You question your intent. You apologize for things you didn't do. That's how the manipulator wins. Not by overpowering you, but by making you second-guess yourself so much that you become easy to guide. At first, they seem helpful. They're attentive. They ask deep questions. They flatter you. But it's never just kindness. It's positioning. They learn your triggers, your wounds, your hopes. Then they use them. Not openly, but in ways that leave you off balance. A comment here, a long silence there, a backhanded compliment framed as concern. And over time, your self-trust, the very core of Stoic strength, begins to erode. But the Stoic does not exist to be molded, Epictetus said. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. That means you don't justify your values to someone who manipulates your boundaries. You don't explain your peace to someone who profits from your confusion. You simply anchor yourself, you live your code, you speak truth with action, because integrity is the language manipulators cannot understand. Look at someone like Prince Harry. For years, his public life was curated by others. The expectations, the guilt, the press, the legacy. It all formed a prison wrapped in duty. But eventually he chose to step away, to reclaim his voice, to build a new path. That was not an act of rebellion. It was an act of clarity, a Stoic decision made in silence, guided by inner truth, not outer demand. So how do you deal with the manipulator? You stop explaining, you stop dancing around their tactics, you reclaim your internal compass, you return to what is true, you enforce boundaries, not loudly but firmly. And when they respond with guilt or confusion, you don't bite the bait. You observe, you hold the line, you walk away if you must. Because the Stoic doesn't seek to win control games, they rise above them entirely. They understand that confusion is the first step to control, so they protect their clarity with everything. They write, they reflect, they choose stillness over stimulation, silence over provocation. And when someone must distort your mind just to keep you close, you don't fight, you leave. Number 11, the overindulgent. They don't argue, they don't insult, they don't guilt you, but slowly, quietly, they erode your edge. The overindulgent person doesn't seem harmful at first. They're laid back, they're fun, they encourage you to live a little, but the danger lies in their influence, not in what they demand, but in what they normalize. They celebrate escape, they glamorize comfort, and they mock discipline as if it's a burden instead of a foundation. The Stoics warned us about this pull, Seneca wrote. No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. The overindulgent person lives by the opposite creed. Avoid hardship, seek ease, and never question the cost. To them, structure is unnecessary, limits are too harsh, and anyone who holds themselves to a higher standard is too intense. But this mindset is not freedom, it's surrender. At first you think it's harmless. One skipped workout, one late night, one more episode, one more drink. But slowly you start compromising. You start pushing back your priorities. You stop honoring your own word. And the worst part, you feel like you're bonding, like you're connecting. But what's really happening is erosion of discipline, of focus, of identity. Epictetus reminded us, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. But the overindulgent person is enslaved, not by force, but by impulse. They follow cravings like commandments. They chase the next hit of pleasure with no thought for what it's costing them. And if you stay close to that energy too long, it will begin to rewrite what you believe is acceptable. A powerful modern example is David Goggins. He didn't begin as a symbol of self-mastery. He began in a state of avoidance, addicted to sugar, screens, and softness. But through brutal honesty, repetition, and structure, he built a life anchored in discipline. The transformation didn't happen by surrounding himself with ease. It happened by confronting it, by starving the voice that said, "You've done enough," and feeding the one that whispered, "Keep going." So how does the Stoic respond to the overindulgent? You don't shame them. You don't preach. You simply raise your standards and refuse to lower them to fit in. You get up early. You train even when no one's watching. You protect your time, your energy, your space. And when comfort calls you to drift, you stay anchored in purpose. Because Stoicism is not about rejecting joy. It's about understanding where real joy comes from. Not in indulgence, but in earned satisfaction, in waking up and knowing you honored your values, even when it was inconvenient. The Stoic knows a soft life is not a free life. It's a life trapped by desire, dulled by distraction, and quietly ruled by what feels good in the moment. But the life of discipline, that's the life that builds strength, peace, and unshakable self-respect. You don't need to confront, argue, or explain. You only need to see clearly and act accordingly. The people around you either pull you toward your higher self or anchor you in confusion, weakness, and emotional noise. Protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. Remember what Marcus Aurelius said, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do. That's not indifference. That's freedom. If this message spoke to something you felt deep down, make sure you like, subscribe, and keep walking the Stoic path, in clarity, in peace, and in strength.